My name is Kennedy Adams, 34 years old, living and working in Boston. That evening, inside the chandelier-lit dining room of my parents' estate in Connecticut, my sister suddenly spoke up in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. "That tiny rental of yours probably barely fits a bed, huh?" Everyone burst out laughing. My parents smiled in agreement. I sat quietly, my wine glass trembling slightly in my hand, but not from shame. Have you ever been mocked by your entire family in the very celebration you helped pay for? Have you lived beneath the weight of judgment, only to one day hold the keys to everything they proudly flaunt? If you've ever hidden your success for fear of being dismissed, leave a comment below. Hit like if you've ever been underestimated, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happened after that dinner changed everything. I still remember that summer afternoon vividly, the heat pouring down like fire on the road leading to the white-fenced house where I spent the first 18 years of my life. The kitchen used to smell like the apple pies Mom baked every weekend, but that day there was no smell of pie, only my father's voice. Clear, cold, and final. "If you're choosing to drop med school to chase some silly business idea, then it's best you pack your things and go." I stood there, backpack slung over my shoulder, my suitcase rattling behind me, and inside my chest, a faint hope that maybe this was the start of something real. My mother didn't look at me. She stood behind the dining table, clutching the edge of the tablecloth like it might hold me in place. But she said nothing. No plea to stay, no question about where I'd go or how I'd survive. I didn't cry. There was just a still emptiness spreading inside me. What people call being cast aside. I knew exactly what that felt like. I drove my beat-up old Honda, bought with money I'd saved from working part-time in 12th grade, all the way to New Jersey, the only place I'd ever visited that made me feel like I could turn things around. I parked in a small lot near a public park, curled up in the driver's seat under a thin blanket, listening to crickets buzz beyond the car windows. My first night with no bed, no walls, just the black sky and the unexpected chill of August. I landed a daytime barista job at a tiny cafe, and waited tables at an Italian restaurant in the evenings. Every cent I earned went to gas, toiletries, and occasionally a breakfast sandwich I'd stretch across the day. Each morning, I used the public restroom near the train station to splash cold water on my face, wiped down with baby wipes, adjusted my hair, and put on a white button-down shirt I ironed with a small travel iron I kept hidden in my trunk. Then I stepped outside like I lived a perfectly normal life. No one in my family ever asked where I was. Not a single text from Mom. No call from Dad. Maddie stayed busy posting pictures of champagne brunches on social media. While I slurped instant noodles made with hot water begged from a gas station, she posted lakeside dinners with the caption, "We were born to enjoy life, not just survive it." Sometimes I'd stare at those posts and wonder, had I made the wrong choice? But that feeling passed quickly. I'd bow my head, open my old laptop, and go back to learning how to appraise real estate, negotiate contracts, and write investor-worthy business plans. I was building something real even if no one acknowledged it. One night, while making lattes behind the counter, an older customer stared at me for a long moment before gently asking, "Sweetheart, do you have a family?" I froze, unsure what to say. He saw the pause in my eyes, then gave a sad smile. "Not everyone's born into the right place. But as long as you keep going, no one gets to tell you you're not enough." I never forgot those words. 2 months later, I rented a small room on the 3rd floor of a rundown house. The walls were cracked and the heater clanked all night, but to me it was a palace. I had a real bed, a tiny window overlooking a neighbor's roof, and a patch of wall to pin up a map of the city, marked with neighborhoods I plan to invest in someday. I emailed my mother on her birthday. Just one line, "Hope you're well." "I'm doing fine." No reply. There never was. I never told anyone about the time I lived in my car. No one knew I once stood shivering in the rain outside a bookstore, unable to afford a test prep manual. No one saw me beg a small bank for the very first loan to launch my fledgling real estate firm, without a single guarantor. I did it alone. And now, sitting in the luxurious dining room of my parents' mansion, surrounded by the sound of my sister's laughter, I didn't feel angry. I felt cold. Cold from the years of being forgotten. Cold from the silence of people who were supposed to care. And cold, because I no longer needed their approval. That coldness, I'd grown used to it. And it's the very thing that kept me standing all this time. I swirled the wine in my glass, silently watching the chandelier light dance across the deep red surface. Maddie's voice carried across the table, polished and rehearsed. The house I just bought has 6 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. The kitchen's all Italian stone, and the living room has a 2-story ceiling. Natural light floods in like something out of a magazine. Honestly, Kennedy, when are you going to settle down and invest in a real future? That last line came with a tone equal parts pity and smugness. My father let out a hearty laugh, patting Maddie's shoulder. She sure knows how to pick 'em, doesn't she, Dean? Dean, her husband, gave a half-smile, glancing sideways at me with the detached air of someone who believes everything's attainable if you marry right. My mother nodded in agreement. Maddie always had an eye for these things. Everyone has to admit that. Chase, my younger brother, sat diagonally across the table, slowly twisting his fork between his fingers, scanning each face. He stayed silent at first, just watching, thoughtful. But when Maddie started bragging about buying the house, all on her own without a broker, Chase set his fork down. The faint clink of metal against porcelain rang out with quiet finality. You put the house in your name? The whole table paused. Maddie raised her brows as if the question were beneath her. Of course it's in my name, she said, speaking a little slower. Everything's notarized. Dean just helped a bit, obviously. Dean shifted his gaze to his wine glass, avoiding Chase's eyes. My mother jumped in quickly. Does it matter whose name is on the deed? What's important is that they got a home worthy of them. I said nothing. Just curved my lips slightly, then looked over at Chase. He caught the tiny furrow that flickered across Maddie's forehead. He didn't say more yet, but I knew he'd caught something. Whose name is on the loan? Chase asked again, more clearly, his eyes locked on Maddie's like he wanted her to know he wasn't kidding. Maddie laughed, too loudly with no natural stop. Oh come on, Chase. You're starting to sound like a lawyer. Who even remembers those details? Dean cleared his throat and awkwardly poured himself more wine, spilling a few drops on the rim. Everything's legal. Don't worry, we're not breaking any rules. I wasn't talking about breaking rules, Chase said calmly. I was just curious. Because if you really bought that Lakeview property with your own money, that's impressive. But unless I'm mistaken, that house used to belong to an investment firm. Do you happen to know which one? I looked up and met Chase's eyes just as he glanced at me. That look, it was a signal. He knew. Or at least he suspected. Maddie gave a forced smile. Let's not derail dinner over technicalities. Anyway, she paused, then shifted gears so fast it was obvious to anyone paying attention. Did I tell you all about the upcoming Christmas gala I'm hosting? It's a huge charity event for underprivileged kids in the South Side. A few big sponsors already reached out. My father's eyes lit up. You're doing charity too? That's wonderful, Maddie. You've really got the heart for it. My mother held Maddie's hand, visibly moved. I've always said you were the one who thought of the community. Kennedy, you should learn a little from your sister. I smiled gently. Where's the gala going to be held? We haven't finalized the venue, Maddie replied quickly, then added, because I'm still negotiating with the event organizers. But don't worry, it's going to be grand. Chase didn't let up. So which organization will be receiving the donation funds? It's a newly established nonprofit, Maddie answered, avoiding eye contact, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her napkin. A few friends and I are building the model. It's almost done. Dean glanced at his wife but said nothing. I set my wine glass down and looked at Maddie for a long moment. Do you have an accountant specifically for this project? Of course, Maddie replied, her tone losing the natural ease it had earlier. Everything is transparent. What's there to worry about? I didn't respond. I simply tilted my head slightly, smiled. It was the kind of smile that let Maddie know I wasn't asking just to make conversation. And enough for Chase to sit up straighter, eyes locked on his sister. The air around the dinner table grew noticeably colder, like someone had just cracked open a window in the middle of winter. My father quickly shifted the topic, asking my mother about dessert. But no one was paying attention to the sweetness of the meal anymore. I knew that because I saw Maddie's eyes glued to me as if trying to guess just how much I already knew. And in that moment, it was never clearer to me. The carefully curated performance she had built was starting to fracture. I sat still, slowly running a finger along the rim of my glass, feeling Maddie's wary gaze slicing through the candlelight at the center of the table. She turned to me again with a familiar line, one she had repeated over the years in front of the whole family. Kennedy, you should really start thinking about settling down. You can't just chase these little projects forever. Living like this, how will you ever build a real home? My father smirked and nodded as if her words were gospel. My mother stayed silent, but the way she shook her head and stared down at her plate told me exactly what she was thinking. Dean, my brother-in-law, gave a crooked smile like he was watching a play with a predictable ending. Maddie shining and me fading into the background. I placed my wine glass on the table, the sharp sound causing Maddie to flinch. I didn't look at her, just spoke clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. I bought it. Maddie frowned. What? I bought it, I repeated, meeting her eyes. The entire Lakeview block. The air froze. Chase was the first to react. He sat up straight, eyes wide, blinking as if checking his hearing. Are you serious? I tilted my head, the corner of my mouth lifting slightly. I don't joke, especially not with someone who's transferred cash 6 times this year. Chase stiffened, then gave a slow smile. Not mocking, more like a silent acknowledgement. I knew he understood the layers behind the real estate deals listed under the company I ran behind the scenes. And now I was only revealing the tip of the iceberg. Dean broke the silence. Wait, you mean, you own property in Lakeview? Not just a single home, I replied, my voice light like a breeze across a lake. The entire East Block. 6 properties. Purchased over the past 2 years through 3 separate companies. I'm behind all 3. Maddie let out a laugh, but it rang too high, too forced. All right, Kennedy. You win. We all know you're good at creating colorful stories. I didn't argue. I simply reached into my handbag, pulled out a carefully bound folder and slid it toward the center of the table. If it's color you want, here are the printed purchase contracts. Copies of the land ownership titles. You're welcome to review them. My father leaned forward, his hand trembling slightly as he took the folder. He flipped through a few pages, his expression shifting from indifferent to stunned. This is the same company name I heard during last week's board meeting. They said it was buying up suburban developments north of the city. Chase took the folder from my father, scanned it for a while, then looked at me. I had my suspicions, but I didn't think you were pulling it off at this scale. I shrugged. I just prefer working quietly. Unlike some people who need their names engraved on every item in the house. Maddie's face darkened. Why didn't you tell anyone? I looked at her. No anger, no arrogance. Just calm. Because no one ever asked. That answer silenced the room. My mother dropped her spoon, her eyes locked on the folder, stunned by what was unfolding. I don't need to stage things like you, I continued, my voice steady. I work, I save, I invest, I wait. You bought a house in Lakeview using a loan under Dean's name and an advance from the family trust. Dean jerked up. What are you talking about? It's not made up, Chase cut in. I checked. Dean's name is on the mortgage, and the advance was pulled from the family's investment account 7 months ago. My father turned sharply to Dean. That fund was for collective investment, Dean. You're not allowed to use it for personal deals without approval. Dean stammered. I thought. Maddie said it was a property investment, beneficial for everyone. I placed my hand on the table and focused on Maddie. You call me unstable. But who's really living off other people's money to maintain a perfect image? Maddie opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Her face turned pale, her hand trembling. Everything she had proudly paraded at dinner was crumbling. I didn't raise my voice, didn't mock her. The truth alone was heavy enough to press down on every word. Chase closed the folder and set it back on the table. You always made us believe Kennedy wouldn't amount to much. But maybe we were wrong about who really knew what they were doing. No one replied. My father looked down. My mother stayed silent. Dean sat frozen, holding an empty wine glass. And Maddie, she stared at me, trying to stay composed, but I could see the flicker in her eyes. Fear, the kind that even a thick layer of makeup couldn't cover. And I just sat there, composed, like I hadn't been labeled the unstable daughter for over a decade. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, opened the file storage and tapped a document. The screen lit up, displaying the property ownership certificate stamped by the city of Dallas. I stood, walked to the end of the table and connected my phone to the dining room's TV. The screen showed the company name, Arbor Haven Holdings LC, official owner of the entire East Block of Lakeview. Below that line was the legal representative's signature. Kennedy L. Adams. I turned, slowly walked back to my seat, my eyes meeting each stunned face. Maddie sat stiffly, frozen like she'd seen a ghost. Dean withdrew his hands from the table, shoulders hunched. My mother covered her mouth, speechless. And my father clenched his jaw, his face flushed with disbelief. "That can't be," my father finally said, his voice dry. "You're the one who owns this company?" I nodded, calm as if I were commenting on the meal we'd just had. "I founded that company 5 years ago, using the initial capital I saved after hustling through all kinds of jobs in New Jersey. I didn't use my real name to avoid drawing attention. Everything is legal, transparent, and fully compliant." Dean spoke up, his voice sounding like someone trying to piece together broken glass. "Then, why didn't you say anything when Maddie bought the house? Why didn't you stop her?" I looked directly at Dean, my tone steady. "I have no obligation to stop anyone from buying property owned by my company. Maddie dealt with a broker who was subcontracted from a partner branch. My team actually thought she was an investor from Atlanta." Maddie gasped, her chest rising and falling. "You planned all this, didn't you?" "No," I said plainly. "I was just doing my job." Chase nodded slightly as if backing me up. "She doesn't brag, but I've been tracking market reports for years and I noticed this company. They purchase at least one property every quarter. Their negotiation skills are top tier. Some brokers even call them the ghost of West Street." My mother blinked rapidly. You've been doing this all this time? By yourself?" I gently turned my water glass, my voice dropping, not with emotion but more like brushing off dust from an old memory. "No one in the family ever asked. Every time I came home, all you wanted to know was when I'd come to my senses and go back to college. Dad would just say one thing: you're living a temporary life." Maddie laughed in my face when I said I'd invest in real estate. I paused, letting the silence sink in before continuing. But that silence from everyone was exactly what helped me succeed. No expectations. No attention. And because of that, no one stood in my way. Maddie slammed her hand on the table, knocking her wine glass over, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth. "What do you want from this? To humiliate me? In front of everyone?" I didn't take my eyes off her. "I don't need to humiliate anyone. I'm just correcting a story you've told wrong for years. You said I was unstable. That I didn't know how to invest in my future. But the house you've been showing off all evening, turns out I bought it last year." Dean let out a sharp breath, then blurted, "Wait? That house belongs to her?" I looked straight at him. "Legally, it's owned by my company." The room fell into silence like the sound had been vacuumed out. My father leaned on the table, his brow deeply furrowed. You're saying Maddie bought a house from her own sister without even knowing it?" "Not just Maddie." I placed my phone on the table and opened another file. "There are 4 more houses next to it. One of your close friends used one as a homestay. Did you know that?" Maddie shook her head like she was trying to deny reality itself. "You did this for revenge, didn't you?" "No," I answered, my voice softening, though I didn't look away. "I did it to survive. To live honestly while you were busy building a persona based on admiration from others." Chase looked at me, eyes full of quiet respect. And my mother, she still sat there, clutching her napkin, speechless. But I could see it, her eyes slightly misty, like for the first time she was seeing me without doubt. The room grew heavier, but not in a tense way. It felt like a shift. Like after all these years, this table was finally making space for a new seat I had just claimed for myself. Chase stayed seated, eyes fixed on Maddie. He gently set his fork down and leaned forward, voice slow but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You said you were organizing a charity gala for kids in Southside, right?" Maddie nodded, a strained smile twitching at the corner of her lips. "Yes. We're preparing a meaningful program. We've already got a guest list and sponsors." Chase tilted his head, still calm. "So who's the beneficiary organization?" "I just want the name. If you're taking public donations, it needs to be legally transparent." Maddie took a sip of water, her hand tightening around the glass. "We're still in the process of completing the paperwork. You understand, for an event of this scale there are many steps. A few documents are still pending approval." I could clearly see the unraveling on her face. The firm tone from earlier was growing shakier. Her hand holding the glass was starting to tremble, and the diamond ring on her finger sparkled under the lights in stark contrast to the nervousness in her eyes. Chase didn't let up. Can you show me the name of the co-hosting entity or the tax ID number of the organization? I can run a quick search to verify its status. Dean shifted in his seat, turning to Maddie and whispering, "We submitted the paperwork already, right?" Maddie nodded quickly, looking at her husband as if begging for an escape route. "Yes. But they said they still need a few more documents, so it hasn't been made public yet." I had been silent the whole time, but now I unlocked my phone and opened my storage folder. The screen showed a list of internal transaction reports. I slid my finger and selected the one labeled, Trust Transfers, Internal Use. No one spoke as I plugged my phone into the large screen. The first image displayed was a breakdown of transfers from the family trust account, the collective investment fund my father had established nearly 20 years ago, into a personal account under the name Madeline J. Whitaker. Maddie. It wasn't a small amount. Some transfers were as high as $15,000, vaguely labeled gala costs, equipment purchase, gift transport. A total of 12 transactions over 3 months. I zoomed in on the total. The number glared cold and clear across the screen. $103,200. Maddie froze. "Wait, where did you get this data?" "The shared trust folder," I answered. "You forgot Chase manages the system's backend. And I've never had my access revoked." Dean swallowed hard and leaned back slightly. My mother could no longer keep her usual composure. She blinked repeatedly, gripping the edge of the tablecloth, her lips trembling. "Maddie, did you really withdraw money from the trust without informing anyone?" Maddie stood up, the screech of the chair legs sharp against the floor. "Mom, I only borrowed it. I'll pay it back after the gala. I didn't use it for anything personal." My father stood as well, his voice low but firm enough to silence the entire room. "You spent it through your personal account. None of the transfers had countersigned approval. No authorization. Maddie, do you understand what that means?" Maddie clenched the napkin in her hand, eyes blazing. "You think I'm a fraud? I'm your daughter. This isn't about who you are," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "It's about what you did, and how you hid it from all of us." Chase remained seated, his eyes heavy. "I used to think you were just trying a little too hard to keep up appearances. But this isn't about image anymore. This is shared money. This is trust." Dean stood up like he wanted to say something, then sat back down, shoulders slumped like someone who had already given up. The air in the room was thick, like a storm gathering in silence, and no one strong enough to stop it. I looked at Maddie for a long moment. You can call it borrowing, but legally the word borrow isn't used in cases of unclear transfers from a shared fund to a personal account. Maddie turned to me, her eyes no longer angry but weary. "Did you do this just to teach me a lesson? Because you think I'm fake? Are you happy now?" I shook my head. "I didn't do anything. I just opened the screen and the truth spoke for itself." No one said another word in the room. Only my mother's soft sigh, as if she was trying to swallow all the disappointments piling up inside. Maddie sat back down, her shoulders hunched, still clutching the crumpled napkin. I saw her gaze drift away, lost among the sparkling crystal lights hanging above the table, where just minutes ago she had been the center of attention. And now everything had flipped. Not because I wanted the spotlight back, but because I was too exhausted by the shadow they built from lies. I sat back down, my hands lightly clasped in front of me, my eyes resting on the wine-stained tablecloth Maddie had just spilled. No one spoke. My mother kept her head down, her hands trembling quietly in her lap. My father stood silently beside the heavy wooden chair, as if trying to grasp onto something he believed was still intact in this house. I didn't look at anyone as I began to speak. My voice low, neither harsh nor intentionally emotional. But I knew every word was clear enough to settle in the hearts of everyone there. 3 years ago I was hospitalized in Boston with septic shock. The doctor said if I had arrived just a few hours later my lungs might have failed. I spent nearly 8 days in the ICU, waking to the sounds of heart monitors and the sharp smell of antiseptics. I glanced up, catching a flicker of confusion in my mother's eyes. Her mouth opened as if to say something but then closed again, her face pale. During that whole time, not a single text message. No phone calls. No one in the family knew. Or rather, no one cared enough to ask. I didn't blame anyone. That statement carried no anger, just a quiet, cold cut that severed the illusions they once held about me. I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the faded ceiling, wondering if anyone would notice if I disappeared that night. The first person to call me was a nurse named Amanda, who accidentally dialed my number when trying to reach another patient's family. I laughed until tears ran down my cheeks. I turned to Chase, my gaze softening. You were the only one who later sent me an email checking in after noticing my social media suddenly went silent. Even though I never replied. At that time, I didn't want to bother anyone. Chase nodded quietly, eyes cast down, hands clenched. Maddie sat motionless as if pulled out from beneath the water. After that, I sold 2 unprofitable investment houses in the suburbs to focus on a single project. I hired a financial expert, restructured the entire portfolio, reduced risk, and increased liquidity. Every decision was calculated, not because I wanted to prove anything to anyone, but because I didn't know how much time I had left to do what I truly wanted. I paused, took a breath. Not from emotion, but to let my words have a moment to sink into places long clogged with prejudice. One night, I woke up in my small apartment, my surgical scar still swollen and aching. I stepped out onto the balcony, looked over the city lights, held a cup of ginger tea, and thought, if from now on I live with no one calling to ask, no hugs, no congratulations, I will still live. Without needing anyone's approval. My mother raised her hand to cover her mouth, eyes wide with shock. You speak as if I never loved you. I looked at her gently but firmly. You loved the image of a daughter who obeyed, studied what you chose, married who you chose, and lived the life you wanted. But you didn't love me when I stepped outside that mold. And when I fell, you weren't there. The air in the room grew dense. Dean looked at Maddie, his face turning pale. My father still stood but no longer held that stern gaze. Since that hospital stay, I changed the way I live. I don't attend parties where people only come to pose for photos. I refuse invitations from those who once looked down on my presence. I won't be the backdrop for anyone in this family if all they want is a name to reflect the excellence they think they have. I pulled out an old photo from my wallet and placed it on the table. It showed me, short hair, gaunt face, lying in a hospital bed with IVs attached, eyes cloudy but lips still trying to smile. Next to me, a blinking heart monitor screen. This was me 3 years ago. I signed my own power of attorney because no one on the emergency contact list answered the hospital's calls. I signed without fear because I knew if it ended that night, I had nothing left undone for myself. Maddie's hands trembled, reaching to take the photo but pulling back. She stayed silent, eyes red-rimmed, unable to meet my gaze. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting calmly on the table. I'm not telling this to make anyone feel guilty. I just want everyone to understand that I don't need to pull anyone down to rise. But if I choose to speak tonight, it's because I've had enough of being underestimated. My mother's hands clenched the napkin until it wrinkled. My father said nothing, but his shoulders visibly slumped as if someone had just lifted the heaviest burden of faith from him. I kept my tone steady, my eyes no longer cold but quieter. My success didn't come from being loved. It came from the moment I realized no one was truly there even when I needed them the most. And maybe, in that moment, everyone in the room realized I never needed applause. I only wanted them to listen, really listen, to what they had long ignored. Suddenly, Maddie stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. Her eyes were red, her hands clenched the crumpled napkin until her knuckles turned white. I just want to protect the family's reputation, she shouted, voice breaking from years of bottled-up pain. I've worked so hard all these years to make everyone proud. Why won't anyone see that? The whole room froze. My mother's soft breath sounded like winter wind through a crack in the door. She didn't respond right away. Her thin shoulders shook, tears falling onto her hands untouched by anyone. She looked up at Maddie, her eyes shattering in pieces. For reputation, my mother asked, her voice hoarse. Did you take money from the family trust, transfer it to your personal account, and create a gala that never existed? Maddie didn't answer. She just shook her head repeatedly, her eyes wild as if trying to deny the reality in front of her. My father still stood there, hands resting on the chair back, his face frozen like a block of stone. He no longer held his usual authority, replaced by shock mixed with something deeper: disappointment. "You don't understand," Maddie hissed, turning to my mother. "Everyone always talks about Kennedy. Even when she's not here. Like she's just a shadow, nothing more. When she disappeared, everything became calmer, right? No one argued, no one questioned. Everyone just pitied her. And gradually, her silence made you care more than my efforts." The words froze the room. I sat silently, not responding. Not because I had nothing to say, but because in Maddie's eyes, I saw what I once carried: the feeling of being pushed aside. But unlike me, Maddie chose to make everything shinier, flashier, hoping to shine bright enough to draw attention back. My mother brought her hand to her face, her sobs caught in her throat. "My daughter, I never thought you felt that way. But instead of speaking up, why didn't you ask? Why didn't you tell us? Why did you do this?" Maddie slumped back into her chair, her hands limp. She looked around the room, once the center of lively parties, where she stood under the lights to flaunt her achievements. But tonight, those lights no longer hid the cracks showing in people's hearts. My father quietly pulled out a chair and sat down, his hands clasped before him. "I was the one who started that fund," he said slowly but firmly. "I created it so no one in this family would fall if they faced hardship. But I never imagined one of my children would misuse it to create an illusion." He looked at Maddie, his eyes misting. "And I never expected that child to be you." Maddie hurriedly wiped her face, but tears still spilled. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted something to call my own. Everything in this house used to belong to Kennedy. Love, trust, attention." Chase, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. His voice wasn't harsh but thoughtful. "I think the problem was never about who was loved more. It's about who chose to face the emptiness. You covered it up with titles, with parties and name tags. Kennedy, she chose silence and rebuilt everything from nothing." I turned to Chase, our eyes meeting in understanding. No one else needed to say another word. Maddie gasped for air, her hands covering her face, her hair falling over to hide nearly all her expression. "You think I didn't try?" she whispered, almost talking to herself. "You think it's easy to stand before so many people, smiling, pretending you have it all, while inside you feel empty?" No one answered. Because we all understood. Some truths need no confirmation to choke you up. My mother rose from her seat, slowly walked over to Maddie, gently placing her hand on her shoulder. "If you feel alone, I'm sorry. But none of us want to see you make yourself a stranger just to keep others' admiration. Family doesn't need perfection. Only truth." I still sat there quietly observing. Inside, my anger was gone. What remained was a gentle fatigue, as if after years of endurance, what needed to be said was finally spoken, though late. Maddie lifted her head, her eyes no longer fierce but filled with the confusion of someone who had just lost a mask worn too long. I knew she was scared, not because she was caught, but because she didn't know who she was without the praise around the dinner table. And when her eyes accidentally glanced at me, I nodded softly. Not forgiveness, not pity. Just recognition between two people who had been abandoned in very different ways. I stood slowly, slid my chair back to the table as if no shock had just passed. No one spoke. All eyes turned to me, but no longer with scrutiny, contempt, or pity. I saw something like anticipation, though everyone was waiting for very different things. I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick envelope, placed it lightly on the table, then drew it closer. My hand brushed the embossed seal of the Texas Notary Office. "I didn't come here to reclaim a place," I began, my voice calm as if telling someone else's story. "And I don't need anyone to choose a side." My mother placed her hand on her chest, shaking her head softly, lips moving without sound. Maddie still sat stunned, hands resting limply on her lap, her gaze lost in the void before her. I pulled a thick printed document from the envelope, placed it face down in front of my father. "This is the deed transferring all legally owned assets of mine in Lakeview, including 6 houses, a developing lot and 2 rental offices." My father straightened up, his face twitching slightly, eyes still filled with doubt. I flipped the pages, pointing to the first line. "The recipient is the North Haven Community Scholarship Fund, which once gave me $3,000 to complete my first real estate course in New Jersey." Chase let out a soft breath as if witnessing an unforeseen shift. Father stared at the document, slowly turning the page, his hand pausing when he saw the signature. My name. A firm stroke of the pen. No need to worry, I continued. The fund confirmed receiving all assets this morning. All transactions are complete and irreversible. Dean shook his head, his forehead wrinkling. You're giving it away? I nodded lightly. No one should have to borrow trust to study just because they were born somewhere no one believed they could achieve anything. No one responded. The entire room was silent, like the power had suddenly gone out on a winter night. My mother broke down crying, no longer able to keep her usual composure. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing with a catch in her throat, as if the words she never spoke to me for more than 10 years were choking her. I looked at her a moment, then scanned everyone before finally resting on my father. He still said nothing, his eyes like an empty space cracking with every slow, heavy breath. Don't look for me anymore, I said, voice neither loud nor soft but concise, clear, a final period at the end of an overly long paragraph. From today on, I am no longer a daughter in your family genealogy. Maddie jerked upright as if someone had just thrown water in her face. No, Kennedy, it can't be like that. You can't say that and just turn your back like you were never part of this place. I looked at her, my eyes no longer cold or blaming. Simply free of all ties. You can keep that position if you need it. But I don't want a place built on sacrificing my dignity. Father shook his head softly. What you're doing is cutting everything off. I nodded. I once waited for your approval many years ago when I came home with my first investment degree. But you didn't come. You didn't call. And from that moment I understood. Sometimes what you think is waiting for acceptance is really holding on to something that never existed. Chase stood, stepped toward me as if to say something, then stopped, only nodding slightly. His eyes said it all. Mother still wept, but silently, without clinging or yelling. Just the quiet tears of someone realizing too late that she had let go of what was most worth holding. I pulled my coat back on, bowed my head slightly and turned away. No one stopped me. No hands reached out to hold me back. And honestly, I didn't need that. I walked out of that room, the place that had been the center of so many years of hiding, pretending, and self-deception, carrying only one thing: freedom claimed by silence. No need for anyone's approval. No need for my name on any family tree. Because in the end, I finally called my own name without anyone beside me. The morning breeze on the rooftop of number 41 Tremont Street brushed lightly against my cheek, cold but fresh. I stood close to the glass railing, holding a still warm cup of coffee, my eyes tracing the rows of historic houses bathed in the golden light of a December morning in Boston. Behind me stood the newly finished facade of the Young Women's Support Center where I had poured nearly a year of my heart and soul. A place for girls who had been pushed to the margins, who survived by sheer will without a support called family. The center didn't bear my name. I wanted it to belong to those who needed it, not to those who built it. But this morning as I entered the lobby, I noticed an engraved line on a stone column near the entrance, suggested by a group of volunteers. Here, every beginning is trusted. I stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath, then sat down on a stone bench tucked into the balcony corner. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The first message of the day. The sender was a former colleague from finance, short to the point as always. Maddie Whitaker is officially under investigation by the Federal Financial Board. Starting from trust fund trails, extending to undeclared donations. The case will broaden. I wasn't surprised. It had all been expected since the first signs appeared on the statements. But what made me smile faintly wasn't the confirmation. It was the moment I realized. I felt no satisfaction. Nor pain. I set my coffee cup down on the stone table and pulled my coat tighter as the wind grew chillier. Below, buses lined up and crowds of pedestrians hurried across blinking crosswalk signals. This city doesn't slow down for those who fall. It doesn't care who you are as long as you have the strength to get back up and keep moving. Since the day I left that Connecticut mansion, no one called back. No texts from Mom. No calls from Dad. Maddie stayed completely silent, or maybe she was busy cleaning up the aftermath. Chase sent a brief email a few days later, asking one simple question. Are you okay? I replied with a photo of the center's rooftop under construction, no caption. He didn't respond, but I trusted Chase understood. We had said enough through our glances that dinner. What can't be spoken sometimes is better left to silence. I opened my work email and reviewed the day's schedule. A legal support meeting at 10 a.m., a community organization discussion at 2 p.m., then interviews for the training program. All steady, quiet, no media, no social networks. But every name I touched on the list was a girl trying to find her footing after a past that seemed forgotten. I stepped into the inner office. Light poured through the large skylight, casting down onto the tidy desk with a small potted plant. A city map hung on the wall, marking areas planned for satellite center expansion over the next 3 years. I pulled out a new file delivered this morning. Each page told a different story, a different beginning, and I was lucky to witness those stories come from darkness into light. A knock sounded at the door. A young volunteer stepped in carrying a breakfast box and a small file. She smiled and gently placed everything on the table. I heard you often forget breakfast. Today I brought your favorite vegetable tart and fresh orange juice. I smiled softly. You remember? You're the first person who believed I was ready to work the front desk, she replied. I haven't forgotten that. The door closed behind her. I sat there, orange juice in hand, eyes watching the sky shift to a pale pearly gray of a peaceful winter day. No awards ceremony needed. No plaques on the wall. No one has to put my name in a family tree because I've written my own name in this life, with presence, action, and choice. I thought of the phrase I once wrote in a notebook during those car living years. Freedom is not being unbound by others but no longer needing their approval. And this morning, in that stillness like a lake's surface, I truly understood it. Sometimes, silence is the loudest refusal. And I chose myself. What do you think about my choice? If you were in my shoes facing a family that always saw you through an outdated lens, would you silently walk away like I did? Or stay to keep proving your worth? Everyone has limits. And sometimes stepping back isn't weakness, it's the bravest act to protect your inner peace. Family isn't just where we're born, but where we're willing to see each other grow in our own ways, even if different from expectations. And if one day you must choose between keeping approval or keeping yourself, I hope you are strong enough to choose the latter. If this story touches something inside you, please share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear you, about the times you were underestimated, about the times you chose to walk away so you wouldn't lose yourself. Don't forget to follow the channel to catch more stories about family, choices, and the journey to reclaim our true value in a world that sometimes only sees the surface. Thank you for listening.